Good afternoon, everyone. You all right? I'm trying to show this frame. Where's my frame not showing up? I feel naked. I usually have my little pretty frame. It's annoying. Not working. Anyway, don't know if you can see that. Hope you can hear me okay. How was everyone? Hope you're good. Got an interesting show to talk to you about today. Bit of a personal reflection on an experience I've had recently where I've been seeing a therapist of sorts, a coach for my kids. And there's been some things that I've come to realize that I think is worth sharing with you, in part because it feels like it really translates into some good and bad practices that I want to learn from and apply in clinic as well as across life. So, my question for you to start off with is, have you thought, and I suppose I want your reflections, if you're willing to share them, as to experiences you've had seeing therapists or coaches in any capacity. For those that think that they've seen the titles and they think I'm going to go off on one about my sore wrist, which I talked about on Twitter the other day, don't worry, it's not that. But yeah, I've got plenty of experiences that I've reflected on before, from having spinal surgery, etc., and the rehab around that and various injuries. I'm not going there today, but you can. I'm interested in your take on whether or not you've had experiences with any sort of intervention of which you've seen a therapist or a coach basically working with a professional of which is helping you to reach certain goals. And that could be directly, I've had injuries and I've had to be a patient in the context of which I'm usually the therapist, or it could be something completely different, which is what I'm going to reflect on today. Instead of leaning on the experiences of which I've been otherwise injured, etc., I'm going to be talking more about the experiences I've had recently with working with I'm using the term therapist. I think she probably would use the term coach. It's like a sleep coach for our kids who I've got twin boys. They're now 11 months old tomorrow. And they, terrible sleepers, as you can probably tell from my haggard looks over the years and over compared to last year, and also the weight gain, etc. You might have noticed that it's bloody taken its toll. And so there's been this sleep coach, sleep therapist, whatever it's called, that we've been working with, and there's some lessons to learn, both good and bad, and how I would want to change my practice and behaviours. But it doesn't have to be something like that. It doesn't have to be anything specific. Just wondered if you could give your take on the matter as to whether or not that's been useful, or there's been anything you've taken from it over the years of maybe encountering those sorts of things. So yeah, as I've said at the start there, apologies, for some reason I can't seem to get my my framing to work, my little overlay, unless you guys can see it. Tell me if you can. But as far as I can tell, it's annoying. Barnes is being rude already. Oh no, it's not even letting me show the comments today. What's that about? Are you guys getting any of this? You're going to have to tell me. So Barnsley's just put a comment on. He said, mate, newsflash, that look started way before the kids. Yeah, he's just saying I look haggard and fat and old. Thanks, Barnsley. But yeah, I'm pressing, usually that would bring it up on screen and it's not doing. So are you getting this and it's just me that isn't? Or let me know. Let me know in your comments. Frame disappeared now. Okay. So if I click it again, you're getting the frame, but I just can't see it. And are you also getting the question when it comes on, and I'm just not seeing it? This is hot telly, isn't it? This is this is a brilliant, entertaining show. Me helping to, yeah, there we go. Right, so you're getting it. I just can't see it. Right, anyway, so we'll carry on. So Barnsey, thanks for tuning in, even though you're heckling me. Gemma said she loves the topic. Hopefully you can see that question. Oops, I've left my emails on. What an amateur. So, as per usual, I will just close my comments. So if you just tuned in, I'm asking you if you've had any experiences, positive or negative, of being seeking the help of a coach or therapist in any capacity, and what lessons you've come to learn from that. I'm interested because, we've got tomorrow, they turn 11 months old. I've got twin boys and they are really bad sleepers. I admit, I not conceived of what the upper limit would be of a bad sleeper. You hear about it. I've got friends that have had challenges in that direction and even sought professional help for various different things because the kids have been bad sleepers. I did not for a second think they could be as bad as they are. Right? These are lovely and otherwise healthy boys, by the way, but yeah, unfortunately, between them. Then you're looking at average night. You're looking at maybe 6 or 7. It's prolonged wake up periods, and weirdly, we've been keeping a log because of this therapist we've been seeing, coach we've been seeing, means that one of them happens to have a blinder of a night and only wakes up once for half an hour. The other one seems to then make it 6 or 7 times that night. So yeah, it's bizarrely they never coincide on having a good night at the same time. But I'm not here to whinge about that. I could do the whole show doing that. I could do a whole week's worth of shows whinging about that. It's been bloody hard. However, we've been then we've sought the help over different formats. We've been ebooks and courses and trying new things and learning, and we've been for months now. We've been testing, changing variables, doing different things. But we then paid for a more direct, more hands-on approach to things through a sleep coach. And the key lesson that I wanted to share with you that I definitely will be reflecting on is that we've then handed over a log of the behavior, what they eat, what they sleep, what their nap schedules are, how we go about it, the routine of which we slow them down to get them to bed. And you then submit that as like a dossier to this coach, and then which is a totally normal practice and a useful thing for us to write down, and we've been writing a lot down anyway. But then what's happened is on our first call about 4 weeks ago, she then said, right, she's got this thing, and she clearly looked at it and been like, that is super disordered. There's a lot wrong with it, essentially, according to what she would typically advise. And so she's then quite confidently said, look, we're going to tidy this up. We're going to do things differently. And within days, it's going to be difficult. You're going to need to do certain things. You're going to need to stop this, stop that, stop feeding them here, stop feeding them there. It's going to be difficult for a few days, but then it's going to become much more orderly because the routine is going to be far tidier. And psyched us up for that and said, look, a few days, it's going to be really tough, but then it's going to be worth it. And it's going to turn a corner, and I'm really confident of that. And it was really quite assuring and things that she was so confident in that direction. Now, unfortunately, despite best efforts and despite lots of tinkering, it's just not gone that way. So there's 2 things that I want to start off with, is that the expectation management has been really poor because she psyched us up for results within days, which we were a bit skeptical of, but we give it a go. We were really compliant, to the letter compliant with what she'd suggested. And yeah, it did not turn a corner, or when it did, it regressed quite quickly. So the expectation management was poor. But it wasn't that she was doing that to just psych us up. It wasn't something that she sort of, we weren't going to pay her if she didn't make us get us hopes up or anything like that. So she did that because she really truly believed it. And this is what the bigger lesson that I've come to learn is that what she'd done. I reflect on this now, 4 weeks of it having not worked again, is that she's then looked at this disordered routine that we're then handing over to her. She's then thought, well, that's a mess, and therefore that's the cause of this disordered sleep pattern that these twin boys are having. And as it turns out, as she's come to accept, and a month later with it having not worked, is that was a disordered routine that me and my wife have ended up in because of the circumstances of which we tried to optimize their pattern around the boys, right? We've done everything we can, and that's where we've ended up to try and get the best out of a bad situation. It's not. So she wanted that to be the cause, but it's actually the effect. It's the effect of, good 6 months of us doing as best, and that's what it looks like. And don't get me wrong, there weren't some problems with it, but we're both therapists by background. We've done as much as we can. We've read and studied as much as we can. We've tried to do everything, and that's what we've ended up with. And so part of her confidence was fueled, and her expectation management was fueled by looking at it and thinking, well, that's a hot mess, and maybe, I dare say, and she did reflect on this afterwards, a couple of days ago, we had a final call with her, and she'd said that normally, you tidy up that routine and it improves. is that, yeah, well, normally, unfortunately, for whatever reason, I'm not saying because we were special, but in this instance, we were clearly, it wasn't a normal circumstance. These aren't, say, normal boys. They are, they're otherwise healthy. And I'm not suggesting we're an enigma in another situation, but I'm just meaning that in this instance, that pattern wasn't causal, and you've not treated us as individuals. You've not then looked at all the variables we've tinkered with. We've not maybe spelt out to you what we've done up to that point. And that's where I want to play that on to where your patients are concerned. And certainly something I'll make sure I don't do, and hopefully don't do, is that, one, you've got to be careful managing expectations on timeframes, and be careful with how you prognosticize, is that a word? But then the other thing is that when someone is describing to you what might be classic traits, like an example would be if someone's coming in and they're saying, well, you know, I've got this sore tendon from running, and so I've rested it for a good 3-week period, 4-week period, and then when I get back into my normal training mileage, it's really sore again. You might be there thinking, well, classically, that is a pattern of behavior that would predispose you for it being sore. You're over resting, and then you're going back too quickly. And so you might be hearing that and thinking that that's someone that, well, will tidy up that routine and things are going to be good. And so you might then allow yourself to think, well, let's do this, and I'm confident that we'll be able to turn this around this time round. Now, in that instance, it could well be that there's various reasons as to why they're doing that. And it also might not be quite as tidy as it seems. There might be other factors. And because you thought it was a penalty kick, because you thought it's, well, that's the problem here, you might be missing something. That's an area where it could have blinded you from having an extra close look at that tendon problem, that person, the circumstances around their life, and realizing that whilst that might be a disordered routine, it's actually not the be-all and end-all. And there could be something else. An example being that it could be actually misdiagnosis. You're actually dealing with something that there is a, I've picked a tendon now, so I'll just sort of go with it and say if it was a patella, then you're in a situation where actually there's this underlying and corresponding fat pad issue that's working alongside this. And so whilst the routine is definitely not playing it's not playing a positive role in this, if you were to think that that was everything and you missed the other contributing variables to their symptoms, in this case, you weren't to then assess carefully enough to realize that there's an underlying and adjacent fat pad issue, that's going to be a problem. And in this instance, with this sort of sleep training lark, that's sort of my take on the matter. You never know for fact, but it just feels like what's happened is, and I understand how it's happened, is that that's been assumed to be the problem, and therefore trying to correct for that not working has meant you've then mismanaged expectation, but also you've just failed to treat the individual case as an individual case because it's sort of ticked all your boxes. And we sometimes even use imagery and language to this effect. Across medicine, you might have heard this expression. They say if you hear hooves, it might be zebras, but it's probably horses because they're more common. It's not likely to be a unicorn. And so you might have heard this expression in part because there's this notion that that's the nature of probability, is that when there's a certain thing that's being described, think about the common things it could be, and it's more likely to be those because that's probability. Totally reasonable thing to think about, but zebras exist is the punchline there, and you've got to make sure that the rarer stuff you don't miss. In this instance, I think we were treated like a horse. I'm not sure we're a zebra, but we've been treated like a horse in part because it felt like the presentation that we gave was something that was seen as being classic, when in hindsight, despite best efforts, it hasn't responded for various reasons. And so I hope that I've been someone that advocates for, and in my own practice doesn't make those mistakes. That's a complacency error in my opinion. But certainly, having been through this experience, there's two key things that are a perfect storm that leave a bad taste. One is that you've not been treated as an individual. But the second thing is that the expectation management is such that in MSK, they're the patients that don't turn back up. Well, they're the ones that give a negative review if they're even willing to talk to you. Or they're certainly the ones that sort of roll their eyes if they're never going to give a recommendation. They're not your word of mouth referrers, really. They're the ones that are sort of like, yeah, overpromised, underdelivered, and thought that I was something just generic and gave me something that was quite a generic plan. Might have been really personable, but there's a complacency to that because they just thought I was classic and I didn't respond in the classic manner, and so they had no idea. And that's what you don't want to come across as a therapist, and that's one of the lessons I've learned in this experience, which has been novel. Now, I did ask you guys the question as to whether or not you've been in that situation before, and whether or not, and I totally understand that it's going to be a number of different contexts in which you might have engaged with, say, therapists and coaches, etc. And many of you, no doubt, being therapists and coaches, it's sometimes difficult to put yourself in that position. So I know it's going to be unique, but there's definitely lessons that can be learned from stuff like that. And I'm interested in your thoughts too. So please do get your comments in. Today, if you're just tuning in, I'm reflecting on my experiences recently working with a coach, a therapist in this instance by proxy, via them helping me and my wife with our twin boys who aren't sleeping well. But I want to know from you as to what your experiences are being under the care of, or be it someone else helping, let's say someone else helping you to achieve goals rather than you being that person. So thank you so much to those that are commenting. Let's have a little look. Gemma Oliver, thank you for tuning in as ever. I can't see on screen whether it's coming up. I hope it still is, but hopefully I've just shared Gemma's comment. I'll read out the most of it. An interaction with a CBT therapist has been life-changing in the last 6 months. I've seen many on and off in the past few years, private and NHS, been very hit and miss, and seeing the right person that fits with my personality has had a huge positive effect on my anxiety and my professional practice. I used to think that because I didn't gel with a couple, that it was me and that CBT and therapy wasn't for me. But I was so wrong. Stick with it. Having a therapist is not the stigma it used to be, and it's changed my life in so many ways. Well, that's just a fantastic reflection from Gemma there, and certainly something that I'd agree wholeheartedly with, particularly the latter part. Just ridiculous that stigma has ever been, but certainly these days, especially in these times of turmoil, then I think we should all be leaning on each other, both formally and informally, more. And so it's great for Gemma to share that. And although if those that haven't engage with Gemma's work before, then please do check out the Anxious Physio and then some of her reflections there, as well as her services, of which she will be bringing forward soon, I understand. So yeah, thank you, Gemma, for sharing that. And I agree as well. Getting that right fit is very important. I think that we also sometimes underestimate that in our services, is that the compatibility factor, particularly when it comes to a persistent problem, rather than it being sort of a sprained ankle that walks in off the straight or a bit of a flare of the back, is that sometimes that compatibility matters more when it's a more, not even complex, but more persistent or more identity affecting issue. And so getting that compatibility is important, and trying to not dismiss something because one thing hasn't worked. Pulse is sharing some stories, I think, of his issues like I've had with regards to kids and sleep, which is obviously a more direct reflection. My first child's daughter, maybe he's saying, is he maybe talking about a granddaughter? I don't know. Slept through from 6 weeks, but never slept for the first 3 years. The other one, oh wow, empathy. Hence we only have 2 children. Oh, so I think he is reflecting on his own children. One sleeping well, one sleeping not. And yeah, I'm hearing that. And thank you so much for those that are sympathizing with my specific example. But yeah, of course, I could whinge about that all day and all week, but I'm not meaning for that to just be about that. It's just definitely a lesson learned from seeing the therapist or coach. Richard Barnes. Hi, Rich. He said, experienced some great coaching through clinical supervision with our lead psychologist. Definitely made me more aware of how patients' response influences my own clinical interactions, helping me enhance communication and behavioural change skills. Barnesy, brilliant comment, brilliant thought, and certainly something that I've reflected on recently. Barnesy, a good mate of mine, and I've seen some of his comments about being clinically supervised by a psychologist, but also by someone cross-professionally, I think has been something that's enhanced his work, and certainly something I need to be more think more about, and definitely something I want to chew over another time, possibly even with Barnesy. Might get him on the show, so I might rope you in there, mate. But that's brilliant. Gemma's then said, very interesting, Jack. It must happen in clinical practice, even if it's not our intention. Don't take things for granted. Listen and relate to the person and their situation. Everyone is different. The difference is key. It is. We do care about difference, don't we? Joe Turner said, I've only realized the extent of this since my coaching training. I am programmed as a physio to spot patterns and fix them. She said then fix them to a Foxconn. I don't know. I think that's a typo, isn't it? She said to a fix. I think that's so important. And let's not. She then said, I have learned to listen much longer and much harder. It's a bit of a cliche. And I don't think it's a direct quote from him. I think he's quoting someone else. But my great friend and mentor, Mike Stewart, of No Pain fame, of course, of Physio Matters podcast fame, of course, prior to that, he says, are you truly listening, or are you waiting to talk again? There's a massive difference. And in whatever context, and I say this and try and suggest this when I'm mentoring anyone, is that whether that be when you're listening to a patient, are you truly listening and concentrating and reflecting on it, or are you waiting to talk again because you've got something else you want to get to? And that applies as well to interview skills and moderating discussions and debates, etc. Is that you've got to then be more thoughtful about truly engaging and truly listening. And Joe's made a great point there, is that it's so tempting to sometimes lean on the fact that it's pattern recognition is important. And if you hear hooves, it's probably a horse. Yeah, but zebras exist. Unicorns don't, granted, but something could be, a zebra dressed as a unicorn. I'm extending that. There are rarer things, but there are also circumstances that might lead you to think it's more of a zebra, the text. You're never going to get context to know whether it's a zebra rather than a horse unless you ask the questions, unless you listen, unless you study, unless you're careful. And you're not just pattern recognizing for the sake because you're trying to place it. Or some would argue it happens, it's human, especially if it's in the middle of a really busy day. It's been really intense. You've had back-to-back challenging stuff, right? Not just challenging people, challenging conditions, challenging circumstances. We're all worked up and stressed at the moment. But you're going to miss something, and you're only going to make life harder for yourself. In this case, with this sort of sleep coach, who I don't hold any grudges on, by the way, but it's just that there's no way that she's enjoyed this last 4 weeks like we have. She's been pulling her hair out. Can't believe it. Really wants to help us. Really caring lady that wants to help us. But for whatever reason, and it's probably multiple different factors, means that it hasn't worked out. And so she's not going to be celebrating either. It's not been a good experience for her. And it affects us as well. If you make those mistakes, of which we all have and will again, it doesn't play well on us. The patient is obviously going to be the recipient of bad care in this instance, or some mistakes, but it's also not a good thing that only burns us out if we make those mistakes. If you're thinking that other fellow humans actually are just cogs in a machine, and that you just need to get the right input creates right outputs and stuff, as if it's all one big algorithmic conveyor belt, then you're going to miss stuff. It's really, really silly. Ellie Tipney, hi Ellie, hope you're good. She said that she fully agrees that the more vulnerable, persistent, and complex the issue, the more you want to do research, testimonials, background of a coach that she was seeking. Feeling safe and respected, having that rapport, makes make or break for the success of working together. Absolutely, Ellie. I totally agree. I think that's something that you could get away with just shopping, or you might get away with even going with whatever's the cheapest or more convenient or more available at any given time. But the more it's something that affects things on a more deeper level, means that the outcome is going to be related so much to the personality linkage between you and any coach or therapist that you're working with, and the fact that they're going to be willing to personalize as well as having that rapport is super important. So really appreciate your thoughts there, Ellie, and thank you so much to all of you for your comments. It's been really nice to hear. It sounds like there's some real broad agreement, which is lovely as well. I hope it's a bit rantier than it has been as well. I've been trying to just calm myself down. There's been a few ranty ones in recent weeks, but on this one, it's a bit of a calmer topic, and I'm tired. So yeah, any more thoughts, guys? Do get them in. Cheers, Barnesy said. Hopefully, it will lead to some reflection on our approach. Possibly, yeah. I think Charlotte's just more polite than me, so she didn't have me going and detailing my thoughts and feedback quite as thoroughly as I might otherwise have done. But she's right to, and I was diplomatic. But in this instance, yeah, I think there's definitely, you could hear that she was going to be reflecting on her approach, and she rightly should. But then equally, I'm not going to pretend that there's. I wish I had the answer as to what would have worked better, but I'm just thinking that, personally, I look on and I think the classic mistakes that have been made have been that, and it's a shame, but it's so easily done, and it's made me realise that I've done the same thing. We've all been there, and it's a sickener when it happens. I want to give another example here clinically for those that are MSK bods that are watching on. the amount of times, hopefully again, less so recently, I guess, but the amount of times where you just, everything ticks a box for it to be something that you just, it's a subacromial pain, like classically considered an impingement, right? It's sore, you're likely to be, it's tendon bursal problem, subacromial, and then you see them after you give them some homework to do and give them the sort of classic pitch there, and you've studied it as thoroughly as you could, you've heard them out, but the pattern recognition has led you in that way, and then you see them maybe a couple of weeks later, and it's then that started to stiffen up, right? It's only then that they start to show signs and symptoms. They elevate their arm, and you can see them dragging into internal rotation as they elevate, and you're like, of course, this was just, you're seeing a frozen shoulder early as it's starting to get sore. And if you've been so complacent as to just be convinced that that was, say, subacromial pain or tendinopathy or something like that, and you'd then been so rash as to then say, well, just, seeing in 4 or 6 weeks or whatever, especially in these times if you're trying to space appointments, or you're saying, I'll give you a call in a few weeks because this will probably turn a corner if you just do these things. That's the complacency based on pattern recognition that I think can happen so classically, especially in that body part. And the amount of times that's happened, unfortunately, earlier in my career, where fortunately, I think it more often than not was like, I wasn't sure, I wasn't convinced, and therefore I followed them up a bit sooner than I would have otherwise done, and then retested a few things and be like, bloody hell, that is actually stiffening up, but it wasn't stiff when I saw it. And it's just an example whereby if you just rely too much on pattern recognition and don't truly allow yourself that appropriate sense of doubt, or be truly intrigued, or dig a little deeper, then you're going to miss stuff. And it's just a shame when that happens, because as I said, of course, that's really not good. It's not optimal care for the patient, but we're all human, it happens. But it's not good for you. If you just plowed on blindly, no one's going to benefit, and you're only going to get stressed out and burnt out, because we all, especially those that listen to this show, we care. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate you as ever. Joe Turner's given me a bit of a pep talk at the end there. She said, sleep deprivation, absolute pits, but it gets better with a kiss. So thank you so much, Joe. Really appreciate that. And of course, appreciate you all for tuning in as ever. I best rush off, and I will see you tomorrow, which is, what is it tomorrow? It's Friday tomorrow. Ben Ellis is on the show tomorrow. Brilliant. Me and him are going to be reflecting on virtual conferences and who they're for and what they're for and how we should do it and what the format will be for next year's shows. So it's going to be brilliant. Tune in tomorrow. It's going to be an absolute cracker because Ben is brilliant. Get an actual expert on. We'll talk about education probably as well, because that's what he's in. All right. Take care. Speak to you soon.